All right, everybody, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. You are at our final Spring 2016 session of the Computerside chat, and I'm really glad to have you guys here. Looks like we have a great crowd. I'm thrilled and kind of surprised. I thought all of you guys would be grading finals. Perhaps I'm helping you procrastinate. I always liked procrastinating around this time of year, so welcome. I just want to make sure that as everybody joins in that we're getting you connected not only to the video but also to the audio. So there's some notes up on the screen. There is no more music, but by now hopefully you can hear my voice. So if you are having trouble hearing me, please do chat in and let us know. I've got Balan Villanueva here, and he is super awesome at helping, so he will get you set up if you're not. A couple of little things to clarify. First off, I mentioned on the screen that you should use the chat feature. It just makes it a lot easier to not have a bunch of feedback. So if you will look on the little menu, one of the options should be chat. If you click on that, you'll get a separate window, and there's going to be a drop-down button that says Send To. If everybody could just take a minute to find that chat window and find the Send To drop-down and scroll on up to everyone. Right now it's probably set to Balan because he's our host, but if you chat to him, I won't find out all the amazing things that you're saying. So if you drop down to Send To and then scroll up to everyone, then I will be able to get any chats that you send, and that would be great. So another thing is that if you look in the participants window, so there's a chat window, but also in the participants window, we've got you all muted right now, and we will keep you muted for a while. But if you ever want to speak, please do know that you can just click on the little red X next to your name or your call-in number. And if you click on the little red X, it will unmute you, and then you can speak to me, and you are welcome to do that at any time, especially if you prefer that to chatting in. So welcome once again. If there are any questions, please chat them in to me. But right now, I want to introduce myself. I'm Misty Patterson. I'm a psychology professor here at ACC, and I'm also serving as the Assistant Dean for Faculty Development and running the new Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning, which is the FCTL. And this is our center. It has been provided to us by the administration, and it is run by faculty for faculty, so we can have time to connect with each other and share what we're doing in our classrooms that make us proud, so we can have innovation flow throughout the college instead of everybody having to reinvent the wheel. So that's really the idea about what we're doing here. So today we are covering chapters 7 and 8 of this book, which is Teaching for Learning, and it is really wonderful. We've got a couple of copies of it in the library for checkout, so you can go to the FCTL webpage and find the FCTL library. You'll be able to click on that, check it out. And today we're going to be talking about graphic organizers and metacognitive reflection. I enjoyed both of these chapters a whole lot, and I hope you will too. So for those of you guys who haven't been to a Computerside chat before, and even for those of you who have, for each of the 2 chapters we're going to cover today, we are going to discuss some of the research that's presented by the authors on those teaching methodologies. Then we will go over a few activities that the authors have selected as being good examples of those teaching methods. I can't say teaching today. That seems a terrible, terrible problem. And then I'll be challenging you guys to select your favorite teaching activity and think about how you might be able to use it in your classes. So there'll be opportunities for you to chat in or to unmute yourself and talk all the way through. We'll do some voting and all kinds of different things. So hopefully it'll be nice and interactive. I do want to remind everybody that we've got you muted for a reason, but you are welcome to unmute yourself when you want to talk. Just remember to mute yourself again afterwards. Otherwise, we can struggle with some feedback issues. So the last thing on this slide that I want to ask you Oh, in fact, I forgot to mention, I need everybody to chat in. This is a good opportunity for us to make sure that your chat is working. If you will chat in your name and your ACC email address, and then whether or not you give me permission to post a video of this chat. Alana is recording this for me, and if it goes well, if I can remember how to pronounce the word teaching for the rest of the session, we may put this up online to share with our colleagues who weren't able to make it. So Sarah, I got you. Thank you very much. So yeah, the name and the email address and permission. The name and the email address are required so we can give you credit for faculty development. The recording, that is up to you. If you are willing and we've got a unanimous consent, then we will post that later. Great, so I've got Jeff and Anne. Welcome, you guys. Liz, thank you. Marissa. Hi, Jill, in red. Great. So, let's see here. Professor Schmidt, if I could get you to chat in, I want to make sure you get credit. Who else am I missing? Is there anybody else that you noticed that I'm missing? Oh, thanks, Professor Schmidt. I appreciate it. All right, well, we are going to go ahead and get started. And please, at any point, if you have questions, feel free to chat them in or unmute yourself and let me know so I can help out. So, Chapter 7, we're going to start with graphic organizers. And some basics. I always like to give some background about this teaching method. And graphic organizers are basically just visual methods that we can use to help our students. We can use them ourselves in our teaching. We can challenge our students to fill them in. But research has suggested that it can be really, really helpful for improved comprehension, improving vocabulary growth, and also students feel like graphic organizers help. So when they're challenged to use them, they recognize that it is aiding them in their learning, and therefore they're maybe more motivated to use this method than some of the other methods where they don't feel as strong a connection to their own learning. There's a lot of great ways to use graphic organizers. You can use them as a study tool. I often challenge my students when they're studying for an exam, hey, use a graphic organizer so that when you're taking the exam, if you close your eyes, you can picture this, and it will be there to help you as you attempt to answer questions. You can use them in class as a way to figure out how much students know, or to challenge them to connect today's lesson with previous lessons. So that can be really nice. You can use them to demonstrate important concepts and kind of expand their understanding of specific concepts and how they connect to others. Small groups can use them to be a discussion aid. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what your small group wants to discuss, but if you've got a graphic organizer and everybody takes one part, it gets a lot easier. And then some instructors actually use them as a form of assessment because they can really challenge students to assimilate and organize their information in unique ways. You can use this as a testing form. So that's really the big deal about graphic organizers. They are super flexible, and I'm hoping that you guys will be excited by them and come up with some great ideas about how to use them. So if there's any questions, let me know. You can chat in as long as it's being sent to everyone, or you can just unmute yourself and let me know. All right, so this slide, I'm basically just showing it to you, and then we're going to move on. But this is my reminder to tell you guys that I will be sending you all the PowerPoint after this is over. And there are some really great resources for graphic organizers. A lot of them are from the K-12 domain, but they're super, and they will get your creative juices flowing. So I wanted to include these links that are from the book, but I didn't want you to have to try to write them all down. So I promise I'll send you the PowerPoint either today, more likely tomorrow, but you'll have this as a set of resources for places you can examine to look for more ideas on graphic organizers. The book does suggest that smart art options in Microsoft are a good idea. You can find those both in Microsoft Word and in PowerPoint, and I will show you some examples today of smart art organizers because they are really great resources that you can just reproduce and then share with your students. So I'll show you some of those. Okay, so some best practices. For those of you who are new to the Computerside chat, the authors of Teaching for Learning, every chapter they include some best practices. So we're going to talk about 3 of them from this chapter. And finding number 1 is that the timing of the graphic organizer is related to student learning. So it turns out that if you challenge students to just fill in a graphic organizer and they have no previous information, it can be a task that's maybe a bit too challenging for them. So some researchers have studied the use of graphic organizers, and what they are consistently finding is, and GO here is just graphic organizer, they're consistently finding that they seem to work better for review than for presentation of information. Now, if you use a graphic organizer to present your information as a part of your presentation, that's fine. Students love to see our own thought processes represented graphically. But if you just hand out a graphic organizer and ask students to work on information that they're just now learning, it can be a little bit too challenging for them. So I encourage you to think about that. It can be a good test of prior knowledge, but if you're starting from scratch, you might want to teach first and then use the graphic organizer to help them find their way through the material. So any questions so far, any concerns about finding one or any of the basics we've covered? All right, I know it can take a minute to chat in, so if you're typing and I'm moving on, don't get frustrated. I promise I'll see your chat and I will jump back to any slides we need to go to. All right, so finding 2, the degree of completion of the organizer is related to student learning. As a psychologist, I love this one because it helps me remember an important concept called desirable difficulty. And desirable difficulty in psychology is the idea that when we're learning new things, when we're trying to commit things to memory, if the task is too hard, we won't learn it. If it's too easy, we won't be motivated to learn it. But that there's this sweet spot where it's challenging but not so challenging. And that's sort of what this finding is relating to. If you give your students a completed organizer, they have no work to do. And so that's not the best way to go. If you give them a completely empty organizer or no organizer at all, that can be pretty challenging as well, and they may not be able to do good work with that. However, if you give them a partially filled in organizer or a sample organizer and then a blank one, that seems to be the appropriate level of difficulty. So you want to consider when you're using graphic organizers to teach students about them a little bit. You can present them with an empty one, but you want to give them some guidance as to how to fill it in. So I think that that's kind of valuable information, and I know that I will definitely use it. Instead of just expecting students to do this from scratch, I'm going to scaffold them a little bit and get them to the right level of desirable difficulty. All right. So finding 3, the type of organizer is related to student perceptions of learning. So I mentioned already that students recognize that they feel like they're learning when they use graphic organizers. And that seems to be supported by some research. And in fact, the way you present the organizer and the organizer that you select seems to influence the type of learning that students feel they've done. So if you pick an organizer that highlights relationships between ideas, they will report that they've better understood and better retained those relationships. If you instead focus on cause and effect, they're going to report doing better with those. If you're going to think about order of importance and your graphic organizer highlights that consideration, then that's what students seem to learn. So the idea is pick an organizer that highlights the information that you're hoping that students will maintain, because it does seem to really help. And there are many different types of organizers, so here probably the hardest part is picking the right one for you and your students. So any questions so far? I think things will be a little clearer once you start seeing some organizers. But right now we've just got these ideas that you don't want to make the task too hard. You also don't want to make it too easy. Sorry, I'm shuffling paper right by the speaker. That you want to consider the right graphic organizer for your task. and that you maybe want to use graphic organizers after you've presented material rather than while you're presenting material. So, questions, comments, thoughts? All right, so we're going to move on to my favorite part when we get to the ideas. So the authors of Teaching for Learning call the tips that they have for us ideas, which are intentionally designed educational activities. So what I've done for today is I've selected 4. I think the chapter had something like 15, but I knew there was no way we were going to cover all of those. So I've picked my 4 favorites, and I'm going to briefly introduce you to all 4 and then ask you to vote on which ones you would like to hear. So I am going to say each of you should give me the one you don't want me to skip, and you can just give it to me by the number. So hypothesis proof organizer would be number 1, concept maps will be number 2, and so on. So let me quickly give you a brief intro to each of these. The hypothesis proof organizer is really for classes where you want to teach students about cause and effect, about evidence and theories, about hypotheses and research. So if you teach a class that has that kind of material, it can really challenge students to demonstrate that they have some evidence to support their assertions. Now I'm going to say, even if you're not in a science class, if you're asking your students to formulate, say, composition in an English class, and you've asked them to provide a thesis statement, you could use the hypothesis proof organizer as well, except instead of a hypothesis, you would have your thesis statement, and then you could have some evidence that might support or disconfirm that thesis statement. So that's the first one. Concept maps is really a great graphic organizer to help connect concepts that students might think are completely separate and bring them into alignment. We've talked in previous Computerside chats about how novices often see information as being completely separate, and it makes it very hard to learn and to maintain it. But that experts, we see all the connections between seemingly random bits of information, and it makes our memory stronger, and it makes us think differently. So concept maps can be a way that you can help students move towards a more expert view of their own knowledge. And you're really just asking them to find a main concept and then connect other supporting concepts to it. Those are concept maps. The 3-2-1 process is probably the most flexible graphic organizer. It is essentially going to require you to come up with 3 things you want from students. And you're going to ask for 3 of one of them, 2 of the next, and 1 of the other. I will show you some sample prompts and a sample graphic organizer if you guys select this one, but it is a really good way actually to get feedback from your students about how well they're understanding what you've taught and how ready they feel to move on. So that's the 3-2-1 process. The zone of relevance might be valuable to you if you would like to give students practice with figuring out what's the most important bit of information and what might be a relatively less important bit of information. So you basically get them to pick a concept that they need to cover, and you rank order things in terms of their importance. This can be really valuable if you've had students do reading or something like that, where you have your own relative importance list, and you'd like to check to see if students are picking up on the same thing, or if you've done a mini lecture and you want to see if students are assessing what you think is most important appropriately, then you can use this one. And I got a text from you, but I'm not able to read it. I think there's some typos, so if you can let me know what you're referring to, I would be happy to help. Joyce has asked, I'm wondering if they can be good for clinicals at the hospital. Yeah, there's, I would say for clinicals, I don't want to say all of these could work. So you're picking 3-2-1, and what is what one called? I don't know which one you're talking about. Okay, so let me ask you guys, just to help me make this go a little bit more quickly, if you'll tell me which one you wouldn't want to skip just by the number. So for instance, if you're picking 3-2-1, give me the number 3. If you're picking hypothesis proof, pick number 1. And as soon as you let me know which one you are referring to, I will be happy to clarify. So I'm going to start taking the vote. We've got 2 for 3-2-1. Got a bunch for 3, 2, 1. Wow, we've got a lot of people open. Okay. Oh, no worries, Dan. Yeah, so I did mention 4, and they're all right up there on the screen. Are you able to see the screen? Okay. So it's looking from my count that the majority of folks are interested in the 3, 2, 1 process, which is number 3. Got a couple for concept maps, which is number 2, and then one for the number 1, the hypothesis proof. So I am going to go ahead and cover those 3. And as I mentioned before, when the PowerPoint comes to you guys, you will also get the 4th one, the zone of relevance. So here is the hypothesis proof organizer. And I will show you actually the graphic organizer in a second. But again, just as a reminder, this is the one where you're asking students to support an idea with some evidence or else to disconfirm it. It's very flexible, and I really like it because you can do it as a whole class where you write the graphic organizer on the board and get the class to fill it in, or you can have students do it in small groups where you provide them with a handout, or you can even give a handout and ask them to do it individually. So the preparation for this one is pretty easy. You're going to think about what question you're going to have your students attack, and you're going to create a template. So let me show you a sample template so that you know what we're talking about as we move on for the rest of the process. So I promise I'll come back to this slide, but I want to show you guys what the template looks like first. So the idea here is that you would give them a template that has space for a hypothesis or space for a thesis statement or even space for a diagnosis. If you're in the health sciences, you could potentially put a diagnosis there. And then you give them columns for information that seems to support that hypothesis, supports that diagnosis, supports that thesis statement, and then one column that disproves or doesn't support any of the things that we're talking about, the thesis statement, the hypothesis. And then the authors suggest you don't have to include this last column, but I went ahead and included it because I like it, and this is sort of your final idea. And the final idea is where you would write out, well, it looks like there's more things supporting this hypothesis than not supporting it, so I would go ahead and say, yeah, we should support this hypothesis. So the final column is where you sort of weigh in on the other 2 columns and make a final decision. So any questions about what the graphic organizer looks like or why you've got the hypothesis up top and then the 3 columns? All right. And it's on the screen right now. Are you not able to see that? Lauren, would you check to make sure that Anne's doing okay with the video, the visuals? And if you've got, I'm sharing my screen right now, so you should be able to see my PowerPoint slides. And if you're not, Alon's going to try to help you out. Okay, so Red said, yes. Right, exactly. This is sort of like a pro and con chart, right? When you're trying to figure out whether you should go on vacation to one place or another place. So you could have pro, you could have con, really exactly. And Joyce suggests that you might need to give signs and symptoms. So you could have symptoms that go along with the diagnosis. You could have symptoms that go against the diagnosis, because I'm pretty sure that people can have a bunch of symptoms that maybe aren't even related to the diagnosis. So there might be some distractors, and you can title them in whatever way works for you. So really the idea is just to give them a graphic way to attack this, this job that they have. So let me bounce back to the previous slide. All right, so the process for this is you would engage in a mini lecture or discussion on hypotheses and testing, if that's what you're going for. If you are instead talking about thesis statements, you would share some information about that, or differential diagnosis. Then you give students some time to work on the organizer, and you should have also had given your information to your students prior to this that you're asking them to assess. After they've completed the organizer, it's a good idea to have a discussion with the students about why they place things in certain spots. I have often found that sometimes students use something as support when it's actually not supporting the hypothesis. It's an issue with critical thinking, and it can take some practice. So you want to give everybody a chance to see what you think the chart should look like and explain why they made the selections that they made. After you've done that, you can, as a class, come to a consensus about whether the thesis statement looks like it's supportable, or whether the diagnosis is the correct one, or whether the hypothesis should be accepted, refuted, or revised. And then you are all set. So that's really the way the hypothesis proof organizer works. Oh, good, and I'm glad you got it all. And so now what I like people to do is take a moment to reflect on this idea and think about whether it might work in your class. And again, don't get stuck on this whole hypothesis proof thing, because I really do think, like Red said, if you think about it more like a pro or con chart, it can be valuable in a whole host of different disciplines. So 1 means, I hate this, I wouldn't ever want to use it in class. And 5 would be, oh, I think this just sounds amazing, my students would love this. So I always remind people, this is not my book, so if you put 1, I'm not going to have my feelings hurt. So please just honestly reflect, and then let us know with a quick chat what you think about this method. So got several 5. Lori and Joyce are about a 3, so kind of middling. Okay, we got a 4. All right. So what I challenge you to do, especially if you've given this a 4 or a 5, is maybe think or take a note about what you might want to try to use this, or how you might want to use this in your own class. Because after we've covered all of these, I like to get you guys to share. Sometimes it is someone from a completely different discipline than ours who spurs our imagination in really cool ways. So I love it when you guys share what you would do. Sarah's saying she's not exactly sure how you'd use it for ESL. Let me think about that. Well, you know, potentially you could use, you could put a phrase up at the top, and then talk to your students about, oh, I've got an idea. So if you said, all right, here's a complex idea that you want to share with somebody, and you give them the complex idea and then ask them to write in English potentially how they would share that complex idea in their own words, then maybe give them the opportunity to say, what are the good things about using this, this phrasing, what are the bad things about using this phrasing? That might work. Anne likes it for a persuasive essay. Students could research an issue and have to decide which side they're on. Absolutely. And that's a great use of this, because it really will give them time to organize their thoughts instead of just writing, which I think is always a good idea. So thank you guys. And we'll come back to these in just a bit and let you guys share even more ideas of how to use these. So the second thing that you guys picked was the concept map. And this is another great idea that is very, very flexible. What I love about this one is it starts to bring students from the novice view of your discipline to a more expert view of your discipline. So the idea is you're going to teach them some techniques about how to draw a concept map, and I'll show you one in a moment. And then you get them to fill in their own. So concepts are going to be represented in boxes or circles with lines that connect them. So I kind of think about it as like a hub and spoke model, or it can even look a little bit like a flow chart. But the idea is that you get students to start connecting concepts from one to another. You can use it for a whole lot of things. You can use it to see if they're understanding properly. You could get them to make a concept map with all of the concepts that they think might be important for an exam, thereby creating their own study guide. You could ask them to connect material from several separate classes by drawing a concept map. So once again, I'm gonna bounce over to the graphic organizer so you can see it, so I'm not just talking about it in the abstract, and then we'll come right back. So this is the sample concept map that is shown on page 267, and I want to mention that I made this on PowerPoint using one of those smart art things that were listed as resources. So if you go to the Insert menu on Word or PowerPoint, one of the options will be to insert smart art, and it'll come up with all these cool graphic organizers. And you can just pop them in. You can use them to make handouts. You can use them in your PowerPoints, whatever you want. But it turns out they are essentially graphic organizers that can really help your students challenge themselves to think about materials differently. So in this example, the circles are the concepts. In this one, they've got a central concept, and then they've got other things that are related to that. The nodes are the concepts in the circles, and then the ties are the connectors. So you can actually challenge your students to not only just write in the concepts, but explain why they think they're tied together. So you can ask them to highlight what is the tie, what makes that connected here. And you can ask them, hey, could these two concepts also be connected together, or is it just in this hub and spoke model? So is everybody clear on what a possible concept map could look like? All right, I'm going to bounce back and talk about how you might want to use this. So if you have a challenging question that you know students have struggled with in the past, it might be a really good thing to use the concept map to help them explore it more deeply. So you come up with this question. For example, in my psychology class, my students have often struggled with the concept of operant conditioning. And so I could challenge them and say, okay, here's operant conditioning. We're going to use that as the central node. What other concepts do we need to remember when we're thinking about that central question? So you would present the guiding question to the class, and then you can have them work either individually or in groups, or once again as a whole class if you wanted. But you develop a list of concepts that you think are important first, and this is what I love about it. First, they're just thinking about the concepts independently and not connecting them to one another. And then once they've got their list, you challenge them to draw a map and make sure the concepts are interconnected in some way. You don't just want a bunch of balls that don't connect in any way. After they have drawn their maps and explained their connections, you'd want to get them to report out. You can just call on a group or two to share what their maps look like, and everybody could comment, oh, we did that too, or hey, we left that out, or that's really cool. Or you can also have students turn in their maps for quick feedback or a grade. Students do really feel like when they do work, they like to be reinforced with our comments. So that can be an easy way to grab those and then just take a quick peek and say, you're on the right track, or oh gosh, we need to talk more about this. So that's the way you use concept maps. So again, if you have questions, please either chat them in or unmute yourself and let me know. And then gut check. I'd love to know what you think about this one. 1 is, this doesn't really fit with my discipline's material. Or 5, oh, this is like a match made in heaven. I can't wait to use this one. Okay, so I'm getting some chats. Let's see. Joyce feels good about this. That's great. Sounds like you use it already. Red says it can be used to take an overly general topic and see ways to make it more specific. Yeah, absolutely. So instead of just going straight big picture and then forgetting some of the details, this can highlight which details go with that big picture, which is a really delightful way to help your students start to connect their knowledge. So let's see. I got some 4s and some 5s. Jill saying she already uses this. Well, I'm going to ask you to tell us how you do it when we get to the end of this section. And says maybe with parts of speech or different genres of essays. Cool. Thomas says the connections would be key in understanding students' understanding. Absolutely, because they might just know that they're connected in some way, but if they can't highlight and really speak to what that connection is, it can show a lack in their knowledge. Sarah says in her ESL reading classes, she can use it to help students analyze nonfiction passages. I love that. So you would get them to think of the central argument in that nonfiction passage and then all the other related arguments. That sounds great. Great. Super cool. Well, that one sounds like you guys totally get it. So keep in mind how you might want to share. A couple of you have already done that, and that is awesome. I am thrilled that you guys are already sharing how you can use it. But for those of you who want a little more time to reflect, we'll do it after this one. We'll come back to all three. So idea number 83 is the 3-2-1 process, and I love this one an awful lot. This is a really great method of review and also feedback to the instructor, because sometimes when I ask my students if they're processing something, it's hard for them to put into words what they're struggling with, but if I give them a few minutes, they can really help me identify what they need assistance with. So this gives them the chance to go deep into some subject matter information and be really critical in the way they handle new information. It also encourages that learner-focused classroom because they are going to let you know what they need to be better students. So preparation, one of the other reasons I love this one is because once you know it, you can use it anytime. There's basically no preparation except that you just have to know what it looks like so you can guide your students. You can use a handout if you want, or you can just put an image up on the screen to guide them, and I will show you what mine looks like, then we'll bounce back here. And this is just, these are some prompts from the Teaching for Learning book, but again, you could come up with any prompts and fill them in. You could also use a different graphic organizer. I just picked this one because I thought it was pretty. So I put 3, and what you're asking for is 3 central issues from the material, and then I've left space for them. So again, the central issues for material, that is something you can fill in with whatever you want, but the 3-2-1 organizer is always, you're going to ask for 3 of one thing, 2 of another, and 1 of the last. So this one asks for 3 central issues from the material, 2 things you didn't understand well, and 1 question that you would ask of the author of the piece that you just read or the instructor who just gave this lesson. So it could be, you know, if I were going over Sigmund Freud in my intro psych class, they could ask a question of Sigmund Freud, like what 1 thing would you love to know from his perspective? So that's what the 3-2-1 looks like. And again, the fun thing is that you can use what you think you'd like to get from students. So it could be 3 central issues, 2 things that connect back to a previous class, 1 thing you didn't understand well. Or you could go completely off the rails and do something very, very different. So it really is super flexible, and you can come up with prompts that work for you. So the way it works is you describe the 3-2-1 process to your students, and you share with them what the questions are for each number. You can let them do this individually or in small groups. It can even be a take-home activity. And then for reporting out, you can ask some of the students to share what they, how they responded. And then the big deal here is you want to record the questions or concerns so that you can cover these at another point in time. I've seen instructors use this as a ticket into class, which is where you tell them the class period before, hey, before you come to class next time, I'm going to want you to do a 3-2-1. Here are your questions. I want you to do it over the last class period or the reading. And then you collect those as they walk into class, and now you know that they're prepared for class. So that's the ticket to class method. Or you could use it as a ticket out of the class. What you could do, what were 3 things that you didn't know before today's lesson? What were 2 things that you're just not clear on, and 1 thing that you already knew and you're proud to share that you knew before I even told you about this. That could be a great ticket out of the class. So that's how the 3-2-1 process works, and the graphic organizer here is just to make it easier for students to fill it out quickly. So if there are any questions, please let me know, and otherwise I'd love for you to gut check on this one. 1 meaning this doesn't really seem all that useful to you. 5 means you love it, you want to use it in your next class, and you're just bummed that you're giving final exams instead this week. All right, so got several of these. Got 5, that's great. Cool. So Annie has already come up with some, a 3-2-1 of her own. 3 things they learned from an essay, 2 opinions or reactions to what they read, and 1 question that's unanswered. Those are great, Anne. I love those. So yeah, a lot of people are enjoying this one, and you kind of knew you were going to like it because so many of you voted for it to start with. So that is great. I'm excited to see that you guys think this one might be useful. bouncing past zone of relevance, but those slides will be available to you guys on the PowerPoint. And I want to take a minute. Some of you have already given some great ideas of how you might use these, but we've covered 1, 2, and 3, the hypothesis proof organizer, concept maps, and 3, 2, 1 process. So if you haven't already weighed in, let me give you a minute. I'm going to drink some water while you guys type, or you can unmute yourselves and talk. But maybe pick one of these that you've already got an idea of how you might want to use it. So type it in, talk to us, let us know what you're going to do, because that always inspires all the rest of us.
I use the concept maps in English 1302, so the central concept becomes the central idea for the piece of fiction that they've read, the short fiction. The related concepts are their explorations of the different elements like setting, conflict, character, point of view. And then what ties them together, and the related concepts actually become their textual evidence as well, and then what ties them together is their explanation of how that textual evidence that they've chosen reinforces the central idea as they interpret it.
That's super cool. So you've used this before, and I'm assuming this is Jill. It sounds like Jill.
Yes.
Jill? All right, cool. So Jill, and you had mentioned before that you use this already in your class, and so do students respond well to it for you?
The ones who tend to favor visual learning, they do really, really like it. There's always one or two that get grumpy.
And I think that maybe is true for everything that we're going to use. But cool. Well, I'm glad that you found a way to use this. I think that's really neat. Thank you so much. So I'm looking at some of the other chats, and let's see. So Joyce was talking about the 3, 2, 1, and she said 3 things that they don't know about the pathophysiology of diabetes. So if you're studying diabetes, hey, what are 3 things you don't know? 2 things that you do know, and 1 thing to, oh, nice, to teach a patient on how to manage this disease. What a great idea. So thinking forward about what that kind of patient connection is going to require, not just thinking about the disease, but how a person might, you know, some message that you could have in your back pocket to share with a patient about how to handle their disease better. I love that idea. Thomas, and please correct me if you prefer Patrick or another name, let me know. But you have 3, 2, 1 for feedback before reviews, better preparing students for tests or comp assignments. Absolutely. So you can actually do a 3, 2, 1 on an assignment. So tell me 3 things that you think you're going to rock on this assignment, 2 things you're concerned about, and 1 hint for your classmates, right? There's so many ways to use this, but very often if we feel like our exam question or assignment or, you know, our study guide is super clear, but our students are struggling with it, giving them this opportunity to deeply engage with the material before they have to work on it for credit can really give them some safety so that they can do a better job. I love that idea, Thomas. That's great. Lori says that she thinks she'll use the concept map. She can list different terms and have students make relationships between them. Lori, let's see. I have you. Oh, so for, is it correct that you teach computer science? I think that's what I have you down for. Yeah, I was actually thinking about this because my husband's a computer scientist, and when I saw the concept map, it reminds me of data structures. And so I was like, oh, you could pick a data structure as your central concept and then ask students like what kinds of things you could use that data structure to do or something like that. I think that could be really cool. Love that idea, Lori. Fred says he's a librarian. The concept map can help students in preparing for a research project to focus their topic and also to develop keywords to use in searching. What a great idea. And one of the strengths to me is that I had seen concept maps before, but I had always been taught you draw your central concept and then you start putting in your related concepts. And for some reason, for me, that was a little constraining. Instead, writing out all the concepts on the side and then thinking about how they relate to the central concept makes more sense to me. And I love the idea that instead of getting caught up in the graphic organizer, you can really just kind of core dump. You can just brain dump right there on the page all of the things that you might want to search. And then once you've got them down, maybe some of them don't really fit the central topic once you start to write it out. And that would be a good way to avoid search terms that might lead to extraneous outcomes. So that's a great idea, Red. Love it. Sarah's doing the 3-2-1. You guys, thank you for playing along on this. This is so much fun. Sarah says 3 facts or concepts they learned from a nonfiction reading, 2 reactions or opinions that demonstrate how these concepts relate to something they already knew. Ooh, I like that, because making it relevant to the student matters so much. And then 1 question they have. That is lovely, really cool. Anne on the hypothesis proof says, take an empty room and put the claim for a persuasive essay at the top, then think of details to support, eliminate or toss out any that don't fit or relate, and organize the details according to the topics, like filling each room of the house with what belongs in it. And she learned that at the Lilly conference, and it works. I'm so glad. Yeah, we went to the Lilly conference. We're going to offer scholarships again from the Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning for people to go next year. It is a conference that's held here in Austin and then in some other cities in the U.S., and it's focused exclusively on teaching and learning in higher education. And it's a great conference. Anne went with me this year, and I'm thrilled to see that she's connecting what she learned there to this material. That's just awesome. Super cool. All right, so Sarah says for fiction instead of nonfiction, for the 3-2-1, you could do 3 important happenings from the plot, 2 ideas of how the characters or happenings are related, and 1 thing they didn't understand. That's awesome. I love it. These are such good ideas. I hope you guys are remembering to write these down because they're gold. Super ideas. All right, and Lori is confirming, yes, computer science. Awesome. All right. Well, if anybody has anything else they want to share, let's take a minute. And otherwise, we're going to move on to the next teaching technique. But I'll give you a second. Well, how about this? How about I ask? Let me know if you're ready to move on or if you need another minute to reflect on this. So just chat that in. Ready? All right, looks like we're ready to go. So I am going to move on. Moving on. Okay. All right, so Chapter 8 is on metacognitive reflection. And I have to be honest, as a psychologist who studies learning, this is one of my favorite things to talk about with students. And I hope I'll be able to clarify why and convince you guys that it's worth taking the time to talk with students about metacognition. So, some basics, and I always apologize. Some of these PowerPoints, I just get so excited to share a bunch of stuff with you. I throw it all up there knowing I'm going to email it to you later. But the big deal here is the first statement. Metacognition is just thinking about thinking. And so metacognition is a super important skill to have. It determines if we know whether or not how long we ought to study for something. If I don't think about the way my brain works, I have no idea. Do I need to study for an hour? Do I need to study for 5 hours? Metacognition also determines when I'm done studying, right? If I think about, do I know that topic well? Can I quiz myself? Do I feel very confident or not? Those are metacognitive questions. If you are skilled in metacognition, you're going to be really good at studying and really good at putting things into your long-term memory and knowing if you have enough material to retrieve that information out of long-term memory. If you're not good at metacognition, I hope you can already start thinking about how difficult this would make your life as a student. How do I know when I'm done studying? How do I know how long to read? How do I even know what kinds of notes to take in class or notes to take from my reading if I'm not good at metacognition? So thinking about thinking is a skill that we aren't born with. We learn through trial and error and practice. And so this is why I always tell students, hey, if you fail a test, that is not a horrible thing. That is some information for your backup reserves on metacognition. Whatever I did for this exam was not the right thing, you know? So next time, do something different. That's all we're trying to do as students, is become better and better at learning and remembering. So metacognitive reflection are any teaching techniques that get students to engage in this super important activity, asking them to reflect on their learning, to reflect on the way they're thinking and studying so that they can do it better the next time. So reflection is important for everybody who's learning. It's one of the reasons why in these Computerside chats, I don't just tell you the techniques and then leave. If we can think about how we're going to use them in our classes, that act of metacognition and reflection is going to make us more likely to remember to use that technique than if we just heard it and moved on. The same thing is true for our students. I think sometimes when I'm really excited to share stuff with students, I just tell them all about it, and I sometimes forget, wait, let's take a minute. Let's think about how you're going to use this in your real life, or how this connects with something else, or if this is tricky, what you might need to do to study it well so you can perform well on the final exam. So they really need to be taught that metacognition matters. It is a wild finding, but it's been found over and over again that students tend not to use these reflective or metacognitive practices unless they're asked to. Once they've used them, then they're maybe a little more likely to use them than before, but they do tend to need repeated prompting before it just becomes internalized. So I challenge all of you to think about how you can encourage your students to engage in metacognition. And if you do it in your classes and I do it in my classes, then hopefully at some point our students will internalize this and do it in all of their classes. So that's really my goal here. So if there's any questions about what metacognition is or why it's so important, let me know. But I've got a few more things I'll share with you guys. Oh, actually, I should mention this. Research shows that the better students are at metacognition, the better they are at performing on all sorts of assessments. So it really behooves us to teach our students how to engage in metacognition. So do chat in questions if you have them. This is another one of the slides that's more of a takeaway. I don't expect to have time to go deep into the Gibbs reflective cycle, but these are some nice prompts that you could potentially use with your students. And it just sort of shows the cyclic nature of metacognition. The cool thing about it is once you've done it, it inspires you to do it again. And before you know it, it becomes automatic. And it's a process that when students engage in it automatically, it really, really helps them. So I encourage you to take a peek at this on your own. But really the idea is it's just like anything. Try something, tell me what you tried, then reflect on whether it worked or not. Think about what you could have done differently, draw some conclusions, and then come up with a plan for next time. It's basically the scientific method. All right, so I'm going to bounce on from here and leave that to you guys for later. And we'll talk briefly about some best practices for metacognitive reflection. So finding one, again, this kind of reminds me of that desirable difficulty thing. It turns out that if teachers design the prompts, it helps. Given that students don't know how to do metacognition on their own very often, if you just ask them, reflect on what you've just learned, that's hard. They don't know what you're asking. But if you give them specific requirements and specific expectations, they can do the reflection, and then they can see that it benefits them. So when you're asking students to engage in self-reflection, again, just remember you want to give them a prompt. You want to give them something to aim for so that they can actually do the metacognitive task properly. So in some research, students who are given prompts do better on reflection than those who aren't given prompts. So it's just a sign where our students are, we need to meet them there, and then at some point they'll start to surprise us with their own metacognitive prompts, and we'll be thrilled. So questions on that one? All right. So finding 2, student self-regulation of their work improves learning. So the idea is that when students just read a textbook like they would a novel, or sit through a mini lecture the way they would sit through a conversation with a friend, they can really miss so much information. But the more they learn to self-regulate, the more they learn, oh, when I'm listening, taking notes will benefit me. Or when I'm reading, finding some key points and writing questions for myself will aid me. Those kinds of things are super helpful. Students don't tend to do this on their own. Students don't tend to come up with goals for their reading or goals for their studying. And so if you give them some practice in this, it really seems to help them. The research here is just basically showing us that when students are given tests, if we do an assessment of metacognitive skill, students who demonstrate high levels of metacognition will do better on the same exam than other students who demonstrate low metacognition. It is not always whether or not students care about your topic or whether or not students tried, but it's if they tried in the correct way and if they know how to support their own learning. One of the things, I mentioned this in the last Computerside chat, and I'm not trying to do an ad, but I started using some software from a textbook company because before every quiz on the readings that they would ask students to engage in, they'd ask them a question like this: how confident are you that you're going to have the right answer to this question? So the question would show up, and then they would ask them, how confident are you that you're going to be able to get the right answer? And the idea is that if students are super confident but they get it wrong, or they're not confident at all but they get it right, they've just demonstrated poor metacognition. And one of the best ways to get better is to practice and practice and practice. So every time you ask students to self-regulate and think about where they are and think about the way their brain is working, it provides them more evidence to do it better the next time. So I just love this, and I think it's a really important finding that you have to be the one to help them regulate because they're new to this task and they don't know how to do it yet. So if you have any questions, please, again, chat in or let me know. I'm going to move on to finding 3. Okay, so finding 3, self and group assessment improves learning. I mentioned with the last ideas that students really want feedback. Especially if they're new to critical thinking, it's going to take some feedback from us to get them to be better at thinking critically. But we all know that if we are expected to give feedback on every single assignment or every single thing students do, it's super time consuming. So the authors of the book wanted to remind us that we don't always have to be the ones to give feedback. It can also be effective when students get feedback from peers. So consider that. You know, maybe consider doing some of these metacognitive tasks and then asking students to switch their work with somebody else and give their partners some feedback. I also have them do metacognitive tasks in groups. Sometimes, for instance, if they struggled with an exam question, I ask everybody to come up with a better way of studying for the exam question. And then while they're sharing those ideas, they're giving each other feedback. Ooh, I like that one, or ooh, that wouldn't work for me. But they can hear how other people might work and study, and that kind of feedback can be super effective. So as a last note, the researchers have demonstrated that when students are engaging in metacognitive reflection, something they'll often share with us is, ooh, I don't think I know enough here, or I could use some more support on this, or I could maybe use a mnemonic device to help me memorize this better. And so when our students are engaging in metacognition, it gives us a leg up because it lets us know what they're struggling with and how we might be able to help them. So it's good to know that the feedback isn't just one way. It's really the students are giving us feedback in terms of the way we've taught, and we're giving students feedback on the way that they are thinking about their learning. So we've covered 3 findings now, and I want to take a moment to see if anybody has any questions on any of those, or if we should move on. All right. Okay, well, if you're still typing, I'll promise to bounce back.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, who is this?
This is Red.
Hi, Red.
I was just wondering how this would be affected by different kinds of questions, like the sort of questions where it's really qualitative, like literature, where you kind of do or don't like something, as opposed to science, where it's more or less a right answer.
Gotcha. Well, you know what? It's a great question, and I'm going to say that we can engage in metacognition on both types of things. So if it's an opinion, just the act of reflecting on your opinion and then being able to share it appropriately with somebody else will reinforce some learning. And also, trying to come up with your own opinion, the act of doing that can sometimes reveal gaps in our understanding, and that is an act of metacognitive reflection as well. So if I go, wait a second, I wanted to make an opinion here, but I don't have all the stuff I need to do that, that can be really helpful. And then, of course, in the sciences or anytime there's fact-based information, being able to assess how long does it take for me to internalize a fact, or what kinds of techniques do I need to use to internalize facts. Those are ways to engage in metacognitive reflection as well. So I'm going to say it works for both because truthfully, whether you're just responding to something that you've read or whether you are trying to memorize skills or facts, you have to assess whether it's going well for you or not. And that can really be a powerful thing. So does that help, Red? I hear that you're on again, but I didn't hear. Oh, okay, perfect, great. All right. Okay, so we're going to cover the ideas for metacognitive reflection. And again, I'm going to offer you 4 and just kind of be thinking about which ones appeal the most. And then I'll have you guys vote for your favorite, and we will pick 3 to cover. So number 1 is wrappers. These can be used on an assignment or an exam that you've already got ready. And it's called a wrapper because you basically give a pre-activity and a post-activity. So if it's an exam, for instance, how long do you think you need to study for this exam? Or how long did you study for this exam? What kinds of techniques did you use? And then post-activity, after the exam, you ask some other questions. How did your grade work out for you? Do you have support for the kinds of studying that you did? Could you do better? You know, those kinds of things. So exam wrappers are really structured questions that you give to students to get them to engage in metacognition about an assignment or an exam. Oh, and Thomas mentioned that reflection between a first and second reading would be helpful in literature. So do you mean the first time that you read something and then the second time you read it where you go, oh my gosh, I caught new things? Because that sounds like a really good idea. Oh my gosh, yeah. Because a lot of students think, oh, you just have to read it once and then you're good. But to get them to really investigate how different we are going to respond to things when we've read it once versus twice, that's a really powerful form of metacognition. I love that. Okay, so I've mentioned the wrappers, the visible classroom opinion poll. The authors suggest that you use this on controversial topics, but I'm going to say you could use it for basically anything. This is a great way to get students to assert their own opinions, to also give you feedback on where their minds are and how much information they have and how confident they're feeling about specific ideas. So there are a bunch of different methods involved in the visible classroom opinion poll, but essentially getting them to reflect on their opinions and then present them while being open to maybe changing based on others' opinions. The 140-character memoir sounds fancier than it is. It's basically using the power of a tweet. So on Twitter, people are limited to 140 characters, and they have to, you know, basically explain themselves in that brief snippet. So this idea challenges students to do the same thing with some class material. So get them to reflect. You can give them questions for reflection or all sorts of different things, but they have only 140 characters to respond. And I think students might like this because you could just say, hey, I'm going to ask you to tweet your answer. The number 4 is the learning log, and learning log is you walk students through the process of being thoughtful learners. So you challenge them to think about how they're going to learn some new material, and then after they've taken some time, you challenge them to assess if that worked for them, how they might need to connect other things, and all of that. So learning log is more like a journaling activity where students are investigating what it takes to be successful learners and planning for it, and then checking to see if it works for them. So those are the 4 ideas for this section, and I'd love your thoughts if you would just chat in the number of the one you don't want me to skip. So we got 1 for 4. Okay, I think we've got a couple of people who I haven't heard from. So if you want to take a minute to chat in your vote of which one you'd like for us to cover. All right. So interesting. I'm sure this is maybe based on how I tried to sell them or based on y'all's disciplines, but we have a very different distribution than we did last time. Last time nobody voted for learning logs, and this time it's the biggest number of votes. So looks like we're going to be covering wrappers, the 140 character memoir, and then the learning log. So that's what I will attempt to go over with you right now. So wrappers. I'm going to give a shout out here to Tobin Careau, who is the instructor here at ACC who first taught me about using wrappers. And I love them and I use them constantly, and I hope I'll convince you that they're valuable as well. So again, you use whatever assignment you already have planned or an exam, and it is just to get students to monitor their efforts better and to learn from their mistakes. Because if a student does poorly on an exam and they think that's the end of it, they are not going to learn from that mistake and do better the next time. So the preparation for this is pretty easy. You choose the assignment or the assessment that you're going to wrap, and then you create a handout with some guiding questions. The big take-home here is you want to do some pre-activity and then some post-activity questions. So something where students are going to predict how well they're going to do, and then some at the end where they assess how well they actually did. That's sort of the strength of the exam wrapper. So the process is you give the students the handout, you have them respond to the pre-activity assessment, then you have them do the exam or the assessment, and then you get them to complete the post-activity questions, and then you collect the wrappers, you can have a class discussion. So since I use this in my classes, I thought I'd share with you how I started using it, and I do this on every single exam. So at the top of every exam I ever give to students, there's a question and it says, please predict the grade, letter grade, you're going to get on this exam before you even look at the exam. So what I'm asking for here is for them to engage in some metacognition to see if they know how well they're going to perform based on what their expectations were for what was going to be covered. Are they good at predicting the material that's going to be covered on an exam? Because, man, that's an important skill. After they've taken the whole exam, I ask them again, now that you've taken the exam, what grade do you think you got? Okay, and so they put that there. And I always talk to them after the exam. I say, hey, if those two grades aren't the same, that can indicate an issue. That if you thought you were going to make an A before seeing the exam, and after seeing the exam you were like, oh gosh, I think I made a D, maybe you're not great yet at figuring out what's likely to show up on an exam. Or maybe you studied the wrong stuff. Or maybe the questions were more challenging than you were expected, or who knows why. But the challenge there is, why didn't those two letter grades come out the same? Why weren't you one after the other the same? So just getting students to reflect on that can be really powerful. And then after they've taken the exam and I give the grades back, as we're looking at the exam, I have a handout that says, okay, about how many hours of studying did you engage in for this exam? Do you review your notes every day before we come to class the next time? I basically ask them for some study skills that I think are powerful and valuable, and I ask if they've been engaging in them or not. Then I ask them if they feel like they currently have a method of study that's working for them. I ask them if they're satisfied with their grade, and then we have a class discussion. So that's the kind of wrapper that I do, and I do it on every exam, and students have told me that they are super proud that even if their grade doesn't go up throughout the semester, if their predictive ability is improving, they feel like they have learned something in the class. So for instance, if at the beginning of the semester they were off by 3 letter grades predicting their exam grade, and by the end they're getting it right on, they feel like they have learned something because now they're better students. So that's how I use wrappers, and I really love it. So again, you can use them for assignments, you can use them for exams. So let me know what you think. 1 is you really don't think this is worth your time. 5, you think that students would really benefit from this. So go ahead and gut check in. We're getting mostly 5s and 4s. Cool. And again, it's really nice and flexible and says I would use it before they take and after. Yep, that's the idea of the wrapper because it wraps the whole exam. I think that you can become creative in the kinds of questions that you use to wrap and tweak them for your own disciplines so that you are ensuring that students are focusing on the issues that you think are most important. But a lot of students aren't very intentional with their study methods, and if you can provide them some intentionality, it can really benefit them. So cool, looks like we have a lot of high votes there, so maybe if you guys jot down a couple of questions that you would like to encourage students to take a peek at. If you were to create your own wrappers, then we'd be able to look at those after we're done. So Joyce says, I'll use it before patient care at the clinical and post-conference. Ooh, that's a really good idea because you might say, hey, what kinds of things do you think you're going to encounter with your patient? And then after the fact, you can say, hey, were you right? Did they surprise you with some things? Was there anything that you were not prepared to handle? That's a great idea because that gets them thinking about the next time, how they can be more prepared. Love it. Okay, so I think we're skipping the visible classroom opinion poll, but you guys can take a peek at that on the PowerPoint. Idea number 94 is basically just tweeting a concept. So you have them create very short memoirs that share their views on learning. You just ask them to tweet. You can get students to connect classroom material to their real lives through this technique. And as we keep talking about, relevance matters to students, and if you can challenge them to make that connection, then they're going to remember it better. It can be used as a one-time activity or a recurring assignment. Once you've taught students what you mean by the 140-character memoir, you can just throw it out there. Hey, we're going to tweet an answer to this. So I'm going to take you over to see some prompts, some that the authors of the book have come up with and some that I've come up with, and then we'll come right back here and talk about the process. So you can just say, all right, you guys, I want you to tweet or write a tweet that summarizes your experiences with the course content. So you could just have a super quick summary. You guys, I don't know about you, but for my students, very often they are challenged to figure out the main point or to be able to summarize in their own words some difficult material. So just doing this can be really powerful. You can challenge them to write a tweet that situates them in relation to their last class session. So, hey, how are you feeling about material from last class? Do you remember any of it? Are you confused by it? Where are we? You can ask them to capture how they feel as a student right now. You know, are you feeling confident? Are you feeling nervous? Are you feeling like you could use some more help? And those are all from the authors of the book. And then I came up with a few other ones just to show you how flexible this assignment can be. Write a tweet that describes how you could have studied differently for a test question that you missed. Write a tweet that shares a challenge you're having with this course right now. Write a tweet, I keep saying treat. I must be thinking about food. One that shows one way you might connect course material with the real world. So any of these, I'm going to say, get them thinking about course material, not in a way that they're going to regurgitate what you've just told them, but in a way that they put it in their own words and they relate it to themselves in an important way. And that kind of reflection and critical thinking and connection to the self can really make a big difference. So, oops, sorry, you guys. Okay, so the way that you use this is you essentially just come up with the prompt, you ask students to respond. The authors say that if you give them a hashtag that's specific to your class, you can have them just tweet it, and then you can check them on Twitter if you're into that. If you're not, they can respond on paper. So the process, you just announce the activity and how long they have to complete it. You can usually do this in 5 to 10 minutes. Alternatively, you could use this as a ticket into class or ticket out of class. Give them time to complete the memoir, and then if you're doing it in class, you can have some people share their own perspectives in a report out, and then you can collect the responses at the end. I really find this super valuable because one of the things my students often struggle with is that they memorize a definition or they memorize something that we've learned, and all memorize means to them is that they can repeat the words back exactly. This says no more repeating back words exactly. You have to summarize. You have to put it in your own words. So gut check here. Let me know whether you think this is not going to be something that you would like to use or whether you think it's awesome, and that would be a 5. So we're getting some 5s and some 4s, and we got 1 3. Sarah says, my learners come from all over the world and some don't know how to be a successful student. This would help. Yeah, sometimes just letting them know, it's not just spitting it back out, but thinking about it and connecting it to yourself that will really help you can be a benefit. Great. All right, so got some really good responses there. Thank you, guys. And so I'm going to bounce to the last one, which will be the learning log. All right, so this one, and again, with the last one, be thinking about a prompt that you might want to share with your colleagues, because I just came up with a few, but I'd love to hear what yours might be. So the learning log, really, like I mentioned, this is sort of a learning journal. So it's journaling about the efforts that students are taking to learn material in your class. You can use it as a form of indirect assessment. If students are not writing about material that you think is important, they may be missing your points, and they may need a little bit of remediation to get them back to what they need. A learning log requires very little time. It's super flexible, and it's just basically assisting students in the process of becoming better learners. So the preparation, you can create a template if you want to use one, and I'll show you an example. You can decide if you're going to give feedback and how you might want to do it. You could, again, use peer feedback. You could write short comments. You could promise students that if they turn in 2 logs a month, you will grade one of them or something like that. So let me show you the template so you can get a sense, and then we'll bounce back in here. But these are some of the prompts from the book, and they encourage just having a standard form that students can use to quickly fill in their learning log. So you ask for the date, what they did and why, what they learned from it, how they're going to use what they learned, what questions they still have. You can challenge them to restate an important concept in their own words within their learning log. And then you can also challenge them to connect to previous discussions. So really the idea isn't use all of these. You pick a couple of these for each learning log, otherwise it would take too long. So maybe an appropriate learning log might be what I did and why, and how does today's discussion build on yesterday's? Or what did I learn from the lesson that we just had, and what questions do I still have? So you'll see, because these are all about metacognitive reflection, there's a lot of similar questions here as to the previous ones. Getting students to connect it, getting students to reflect, thinking about how they can do better in the future. That's all the learning log really is. So does that make sense? Is it okay if I go back to the previous slide? Oops, I keep doing that. So back to this. The process, generally, the authors suggest 5 minutes should be all it takes to do a learning log. You could have students do these out of class, but if you want to do it in class, that's also super valuable. So they encourage providing about 5 minutes to write at the beginning of class, reflecting on the last class, anything that they've been doing since the break between classes to make sure they haven't lost the material, teach your regular class, and then come back at the end with 5 more minutes of additional reflection. One of the ways that I love to use the learning log is sometimes I just pose students a super quick question at the beginning of class that refers to material that they should have learned the last class. And I do this not because I'm hoping they're actually going to get it right, actually because I hope they'll get it wrong. Because many people feel like if they understood the material that they heard during a class, that they've got it and there's no more work to be done. So I like to show students in a very clear way, hey, this question that you probably knew the answer to last class, you've lost it. And it's not to make them feel less than, instead it's for me to demonstrate to them, hey, you guys, the way our brain works is that we lose most of what we think we've learned. And if you're not being very careful and thoughtful and working to avoid that loss of material as we're away from it for a while, that you will lose it. So this is one way through a learning log that I've been successfully able to get students to buy into the idea that class is something that they have to come back to even when they're not in a lesson, that if they go 3 or 4 days without looking at their notes, those notes were wasted. So you could also, for the learning log, say find a couple of concepts from the last lesson and give me a memory device that you're going to use to be able to handle on the exam. You know, if you're talking about some kind of programming techniques, share with me a problem that you think could be solved by some of the programming techniques that we talked about last class. But really the challenge here is to get them to see that they need to be doing work between classes to maintain the information. So let me get you guys to gut check on this one. 1 means you do not think this is all that valuable. 5 means you think it could be really useful. And again, if you have questions, let me know. Okay, so Lori and Marissa are both around 3, Sarah 5. Thomas says he's tried the learning log, or he's tied the learning log to a reading log for their assignments. So students are checked that they did read, and this is a way to give them a grade. That's really cool, yeah. So you could actually ask them to share a couple of things that they learned on their own here and what they're doing to make sure that they don't lose that information. That's great. Anne says it would be a great way to see if students have worked between classes and what they learned. Absolutely, because we really do need to get students to believe that the work between classes is some of the most important work. So time is limited for Joyce's classes, so she might want to do it as a take-home, which is totally appropriate. So you could ask students to assess, you know, just tell them, hey, over the next 3 days, write down 2 or 3 things that you've done to strengthen the learning that we did in class and bring them back to me next time. It doesn't have to be done in class, and I love that you pointed that out, Joyce, because it could absolutely be done at home. Super cool. All right, well, we've got a couple of minutes, so I want to take a moment and see if you guys have any other additions on these wrappers or the tweet idea or the learning log. So for wrappers or learning log or memoir, any of these, maybe you could come up with a prompt that you think might be valuable in your discipline and share it with us so we could see what kinds of things you think you might challenge your students to attempt. I'm going to drink some water again so you guys don't feel pressure. And you can type in or talk when you're ready. All right, so we're starting to get some. Thank you, guys. All right, so Sarah says, what can you do to help yourself better understand our nonfiction readings? I love that, because a lot of students really do read nonfiction the same way they read fiction because they haven't practiced anything different. So if you ask them, what are a couple of things that you're going to do, you'll probably have some strong students with some great ideas, some weaker students who didn't even know that was important. But all together, if you use the report out method, they can really learn from each other, and that's great. Red says faculty can check out the classroom response clickers. Yep. I use the clickers all the time, and that's a really great way to do the visible classroom poll, or you can use them for responses to wrappers or learning logs or any of them. Also, you can use, there's a whole host of different ways to do feedback in class. So IRT should have the classroom response clickers, and there's also polleverywhere.com. I'll type it in so you guys can see it, but polleverywhere.com is a really cool site where you put questions up and then students use their mobile devices to respond, so you don't even have to pick up the clickers. It's a little dicey if not all of your students have mobile devices, but I've used it successfully by breaking them into groups and then saying, if you forgot your mobile device at home, don't worry, because you can work with your group. So Anne says she really likes the idea of the learning log, to have students share what they worked on between classes and what they learned from the experience and how they can use it or apply it to their learning. What is the significance of what they did? Exactly. Getting them to really recognize that the efforts that they are putting in are there for a reason and that it can help them, and then they can really practice seeing those outcomes. I think that's a great idea. Super cool. So I know I've cut it kind of close. If anybody is still typing, please take a minute to finish that up. I'm going to be here for a few anyway, but I do want to advance to our last slides just so I can let all of you guys know. Jill says she loves Tobin's wrappers. Yeah, and he'll share them with you. So just look him up, Tobin Crow, shoot him an email, ask him for a wrapper. He'll share it with you. Okay, so just as a reminder, if you have sent me through the chat your name and your email address, then you're going to get an hour and a half of professional development credit for today, and then you're also going to get one raffle entry to win the book. I've got a bunch of copies, and they're going to be signed by all 3 authors. We're going to try to figure that out in the next couple of days, and then we will work on how we get them to you if you are not at your office over this summer. We didn't think that through, but I'll get them to you somehow. So you can win a copy of the book. I want to just make sure everybody's chatted in if you haven't already to do that. And in closing, I just really want to thank all of you guys. I really have been enjoying this so much more than I expected. I have never done online classes with students, so this was a real new thing for me. And you guys and your responses are what makes it so much fun. So I just got the word that my advisory group, we have 19 faculty members who lead the Faculty Center and help guide everything that I do. They have suggested that we run the Computerside chats again next semester in the fall. So if you found this worthwhile, please do share it with your colleagues. We're done for this session, but we're going to be doing it again, and I would love to get more people involved. And I will be sending you an anonymous evaluation form through Class Climate. It'll come from fctl@austincc.edu. It'll probably come out tomorrow, and I'll give you about a week, but please, since we're doing this online, the only way I can learn anonymously about how this worked for you is if you fill out that eval. So please keep your eyes peeled for it, and if you have any comments or thoughts that you'd want to share, you can send them to me at fctl.austincc.edu as well. I really love working with my colleagues. I love hearing about what you guys are doing in your classes. And I can even point you to how to write a blog. If you wind up using any of these techniques in your class and you want to share with your colleagues to help spread those innovations throughout the college, we have a blog with the Faculty Center, and I'd love to see what you guys could come up with. So I'll stick around if you guys have any questions or want to share any additional things, but I thank you all so much. And Marissa, you are so welcome, and thank you for being here. And I hope you guys have a great day, a great end of your semester, and that you'll get involved with the FCTL because we're all about connecting faculty to each other. So thanks so much. And thank you. You are very welcome. I am